The Long Walk captures the despair currently felt by many real-world Americans. Based on a 1978 Stephen King novel originally released under the pseudonym Richard Bachman and directed by Francis Lawrence, the movie poignantly portrays authoritarianism's soul-crushing characteristics. And seeing as the US of A is currently careening into a police state, The Long Walk is unfortunately very prescient. The film just parallels reality, or at least mimics reality, minus all the stupid shit. Admittedly, The Long Walk's relevance echoes the relatable subject matter found in One Battle After Another, which was another film about fascism, but as described in my video on that movie, definitely check that out if you haven't, One Battle After Another is a far more hopeful film in how, even in the face of major societal and political adversity, resistance engenders a sense of camaraderie. That's despite an entire system ensuring that the odds are constantly stacked against us, committing any act undermining an authoritarian regime is just personally empowering. Because in a world that constantly takes but rarely gives, it's good for the soul, just like a good Italian beef sandwich. The Long Walk, however, differs from One Battle After Another's approach, instead reflecting the heavy psychological toll that a fascist government exacts on an oppressed citizenry's collective psyche. Where One Battle After Another features moments of hope and many fun elements, because it's a dialogue-heavy Paul Thomas Anderson film and Leonardo DiCaprio plays a washed-up revolutionary, which is objectively hilarious as shit, The Long Walk instead personifies our grief and despair over lost freedoms, rights, and even people. It's a film that unfortunately hits home, unlike the Blue Jays during extra innings in Game 7 of the World Series. The Long Walk's harrowing story alone embodies this sad truth. Set in an alternative 1970s, albeit one minus disco, the narrative revolves around an annual competition with 50 participants, each representing one of the 50 states, with all of these participants being on the older end of the teenage spectrum. The competition is run by the in-movie America's authoritarian government and is nationally televised. On the surface, the walk's purpose is to serve as a patriotic inspiration for a downtrodden people in order to distract them from the economic and political hardships that Americans face as a result of their government's policies. But contrary to that talking point, the walk serves another purpose as well, which is to strike fear into the hearts of every American citizen. Because this competition isn't the Wheel of Fortune, basketball, or even an extensive televised job interview where you are routinely berated by your potential boss.
If I hear you talk about a fucking camera one more time, I'll stick a GoPro up your ass so you can see how shit you are.
No, this competition is far bloodier, albeit with simple, clear-cut rules where the objective for these teens is to walk on a predetermined path at a pace of at least 3 miles per hour. If their speed, no relation, drops below that number, then the kids receive warnings, many of which can be waived off if the offending party walks long enough and maintains proper speed. Man, I really hope these kids stretch their hammies. But if that teenager receives 3 warnings and doesn't have any of those infractions rescinded and doesn't immediately pick up his speed, then he will be shot by armed soldiers who are following the walk via vehicle. Cowards. The walk concludes when only one contestant remains vertical, and as a reward for winning the competition, the victor earns a realistic wish that can be granted by the genie known as Mark Hamill. Okay, so he's not actually a genie, but you get the point of what type of reward awaits the eventual winner, which is bestowed by Hamill's antagonistic The Major. I'm really sorry for the confusion. I'm glad we cleared that up. As a film, The Long Walk works adjacent to the popularity of the Battle Royale subgenre, which generally features contestants fighting each other to the death in a competition until only one survivor remains. Examples of this genre include video games like Fortnite and Apex Legends, the 2000 Kinji Fukasaku film Battle Royale, which alongside its source novel was how the subgenre earned its name, and of course The Hunger Games, the trilogy of young adult novels penned by Suzanne Collins. no relation. Oddly enough, in regards to The Long Walk, the Hunger Games trilogy is the most relevant example of the bunch here, but not necessarily for reasons you might expect. See, all of the Hunger Games film adaptations and spin-offs, with the exception of the first Hunger Games movie, were directed by Francis Lawrence, who, as mentioned at the start of today's video, is also the director of The Long Walk, which given The Long Walk's subject matter, that shit definitely checks out. Like if Francis Lawrence had a type, it would be America watching kids die on behalf of an authoritarian government on the TV. Meaning that Francis Lawrence just knows the ins and outs of this dynamic. That's sick. And while Lawrence's filmmaking career features a shit ton of variety, including an impressive amount of music videos and a wide variety of genres, The Long Walk is the perfect project for him in the modern day. He fits this movie like a glove, which is why it's so interesting that we almost received an adaptation of The Long Walk from various different filmmakers several times. According to a well-researched movie web piece written by Megan Argueta, link in the description, an adaptation of The Long Walk had been languishing in development hell since the late 1980s, and since that time, many directors like George A. Romero of Dawn of the Dead fame and Frank Darabont of Shawshank Redemption fame were attached to the project to some degree or another, but were sadly unable to lift the project off the ground. Kinda like a SpaceX rocket or an Elder Schlong that has long tapped out. Thankfully though, Francis Lawrence was the one who finally got the job done, which isn't that surprising given his past pedigree with similar subject matter in the Hunger Games, even if those movies are technically imperfect. Because to be honest, The Long Walk far surpasses the Hunger Games films in terms of quality and overall approach. In The Long Walk, the onus of the teenage deaths are on the authoritarian government, which is slightly different from the Hunger Games, because while yes, the government in those movies runs and mandates these spectacles where they force children to murder each other for sport, but the kids in these films are still killing each other, and that's even before broaching how some of the contestants are antagonistic assholes with a very unhealthy bloodlust, which all just ever so slightly shifts culpability away from the tyrannical government. Not by a ton, because the Hunger Games remains their child exploitation baby adjacent to a more murderous kids bop, but still, I prefer how The Long Walk handles the teen deaths, because in this film, the government is 100% responsible for literally pulling the trigger, because when it comes to murdering teenagers, The Long Walk removed the middleman, which is good for both narrative and thematic reasons, as well as the fact that this implies that the government in the Hunger Games killed people by utilizing child labor. However, The Long Walk features an even more important deviation from the Hunger Games. See, the pageantry and televised nature of the Hunger Games as a competition was a major aspect of not just the narrative, but also in the way that the movie engaged with the audience. Mostly because the Hunger Games films criticized the media and how they often sensationalize everything, intentionally or unintentionally frame stories and ideas in a way that flatters the government, which is especially a problem if that said government is authoritarian, and can even transform certain events into entertainment spectacles, even though these said events have severe and dire consequences, and shouldn't be in the same ballpark as being entertainment. But anyway, the point. The Hunger Games portrayal of the media is kind of a problem in regards to actual entertainment like film, video games, or sports, because honestly, we in America eat that shit up. We are absolutely enamored by this shit on television. Hell, we love American football so much that we transform the NFL draft into a must-watch live TV event. And like, that's not even a fucking game, meaning that when it comes to the Hunger Games, the engaging nature of the aforementioned pageantry and live television spectacle somewhat undermines the film's critique against that same aforementioned pageantry and live TV spectacle, given how entertaining it is to watch that shit in the films themselves. In other words, this engaging aspect of the narrative often works against the themes. The Long Walk, however, handles this sticking point with impressive superiority, mostly because the film's utilization of the walk's televised nature and media coverage is comparatively subdued. Sure, we can see the cameras and such that indicate that the walk is televised, but in the film, we don't really see much broadcast coverage, sports-style debates, or gambling sponsorships, which, quick aside, I also will never promote gambling on my channel, so please like, subscribe, and send me a tip on Ko-fi. The Riley has bills to pay. In other words, the gamified media sensationalism present in the Hunger Games is absent from The Long Walk, ultimately ensuring that The Long Walk isn't about superficial bullshit, apologies to Stanley Tucci, and instead focuses on what's really important, which is the narrative, characters, and meaningful themes. You know, the most important elements when convincing an audience to engage with a given film. And The Long Walk excels in this. The teen boys are incredibly sympathetic and form bonds both with each other and with the audience as well. The type of masculine friendships that should always be supported more so than emotional suppression, which is unfortunately a problem. In fact, The Long Walk's characters are often incredibly wholesome. For a few examples, Cooper Hoffman's lead protagonist Raymond Garrity is charming, but is also clearly hiding some emotional scars. David Johnson's Peter McBride is emotionally more upbeat. Ben Wong's Hank Olson offers the necessary comic relief needed in the film's depressing dystopia, much like how I provide comic relief in our real one, Fuck Knuckles, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of other sympathetic characters in this film, but you more or less get the point. The Long Walk's character development just generates a lot of empathy. Hell, even the more antagonistic contestants like Garrett Waring Stebbins, who is a pristine brick shithouse who plays his emotions close to the vest and doesn't really care to have friendly relationships with his competitors.
Boom. Phrasing.
And Charlie Plummer's Gary Barkovich, who is often an awkward asshole to the point of being dangerous, have more human and sympathetic characteristics as well, meaning that The Long Walk features an abundance of characters that we grow to care about or at least share some empathy with, which is ultimately why The Long Walk as a film is such a grueling journey, because despite how Garrity and company believe that friendship is indeed magic, most of them are gonna fucking die, which is awful because many of these characters worm their way into your heart, even cold dead hearts like mine, which ultimately instills a constant air of tension in the movie's proceedings. Hell, I haven't been so on edge over people walking in a movie since The Sex Phantom and It Follows. Like, throughout the course of The Long Walk, we just fall in love with many of these characters despite knowing that most of their lives will end in tragedy, meaning that when these characters' strength and resolve fail, as their numbers dwindle more and more, each successive loss hits hard. And admittedly, before seeing the movie, I worried that these types of death scenes would become repetitive, you know, because there's a lot of death scenes in this film. But The Long Walk worked around this. Each major death scene usually reveals something new about the characters in the film's world building, as well as just reinforcing the emotional through line of the movie. That through line being, fuck Mark Hamill. Okay, so that may have been a little facetious by me because the cruel and unjust government is the primary antagonistic force in The Long Walk's world, but in terms of the movie alone, Mark Hamill's the Major is more or less the human stand-in for the government at large. After all, the Major is the one who oversees the competition on behalf of the government and approaches the executions of these kids with an uncaring, callous veneer, ensuring that he's a truly loathsome presence throughout this film's runtime, as well as the person who the teens project their hatred of this oppressive system onto, which, to make him even more hateable, the Major revels in to the point that Mark Hamill sometimes slips into his Joker voice.
That's my cue!
Meaning that the Major is just really easy to hate, and when the teens start losing their friends to the competition's grind, they can't help but succumb to an overwhelming sense of despair, because this government has already stolen so much from these young men. They've lost family members, economic prosperity, and many freedoms to the hands of these authoritarian dick potatoes. And now these assholes have the fucking gall to take the lives of their new friends as well? Man, fuck that. As you can tell, I'm more than a little heated on this topic, and that's because it's unfortunately very relatable. In real-world America, under the current regime, we are moving from injustice to injustice and atrocity to atrocity at breakneck pace. Then there's how our institutions are crumbling around us, how far-right partisan hacks are consolidating social media, entertainment media companies, and just newsrooms as a whole to essentially serve the role as state media, if it hasn't already. Then there's the estimated hundreds of thousands of people that died from the cuts of USAID over the last year alone. The blatant disregard to American traditions and memorials, the attack on immigrants and the transgender community, and so on and so forth. There's honestly many other things that I could go on and on about, because detailing every infraction and indignity perpetuated by this malignantly cruel government would take me hours to list. If anything, it would be longer than the naughty and nice list. Fucking Santa Claus has nothing on this shit. And I admittedly feel profound sadness over America's democratic dissolution. Every day I have this kind of melancholic loss for how a better and prosperous world was stolen from us, to the point that sometimes I even feel despair. And that's honestly why The Long Walk absolutely bangs. In fact, The Long Walk works because its vibe is so damn relatable. The film paints this grim and somber portrait of an America that is rotting from the inside out. We see families that are thrown in disarray, like that of Garrity and his mother in Judy Greer's Ginny Garrity. There's how the authoritarian government has actively inflicted pain upon all the teens in The Long Walk. There's how the visuals and most shots portray an economically destitute America. Admittedly, some of this is reportedly due to budget constraints, but the movie makes these visuals work in tandem with its narrative and thematic storytelling nonetheless. And then there's just the character development between Garrity and McVry's alone. In this regard, during the competition, Garrity reveals himself to be likable, but also very cynical, whereas McVry's is more compassionate. Over the course of the film, they discuss what the government stole from them and how that affected their views on the country at large. For one example of this, during the walk, Garrity sees people cheering on the contestants and is resentful towards these folks, whereas McVry's kindly views them as misinformed due to state propaganda and believes they would change if they knew the truth, that they are victims just as much as everybody else. And both of these sentiments resonate with me because in the real world, there are many people who don't see the logical inconsistencies inherent to fascist propaganda. They don't understand the clear-cut echoes of past dictatorships in this current regime. Hell, even the people I love can be oblivious to the peril that we are in. And like McVry's, I try to be compassionate towards them because I generally blame the disinformation ecosystem more so than a lot of the people themselves. But honestly, this can be very difficult for me given how I live with justified fear and anxiety over my future. And like Garrity, I have moments where I'm overcome with bitter anger that they don't see how this government is jeopardizing my future and the futures of so many others. In other words, I understand Garrity here too, meaning that this moment in the film, alongside many others, resonate within many of us because anger, even rage, is an understandable reaction to systemic failure, as well as a good scream. Hell, it's a downright logical emotion to feel at this juncture, even though recalling our compassion and empathy is crucial for our survival as well. You know, because remembering the good that this world has snatched from us is a moral imperative, given that the only way out of this nightmare is to scour the earth, flip over every bed, and dive into any dumpster, including Nebraska, searching for a way to bring empathy back. It's a necessity. Admittedly, with all of this being said, The Long Walk has moments where it doesn't 100% exemplify what's happening in America right now. In fact, the film's authoritarian government appears to be a one-party rule sort of dictatorship, whereas America right now is experiencing what is called competitive authoritarianism, which is when there's an authoritarian government in power, weakening the democratic systems meant to check that said power, all while there is a sizable populace and even a whole opposition party signifying that the nation isn't entirely all supportive of the dissolution of democracy, which I don't know if you know this, but being against the death of freedom is a good character trait. In fact, the current authoritarian government is insanely unpopular among the American electorate at the given moment, which is a small comfort during this bleak period in time, but I will relish any moral victory I can get my hands on. Additionally, The Long Walk's cruel, efficient authoritarian government doesn't line up with real-world America's cruel and Batman shit nonsensical one. Because remember, This country is not only run by awful people, but by dense morons as well. To conclude, The Long Walk is a grim watch, but is a well-crafted film that reflects this dark age, no relation, of decline, uncertainty, and fear that many Americans are experiencing right now, which is honestly the film's most vital quality. Despite how many reviewers will rightfully compare the film to Stephen King's source material, as well as the technical aspects in terms of just shooting a film where characters are walking for a vast majority of the runtime, the chilling political angle is the film's most salient point, which I know for some folks it might be really difficult to watch, but I still recommend giving the movie your time, because while some folks may avoid watching The Long Walk due to how its subject matter hits very close to home and doesn't necessarily inspire hope in the way that One Battle After Another does, The Long Walk is a necessary watch because it captures how it feels to exist in this turbulent era in American history. Because sometimes a statement of being like this is enough. Even though sure, hope is very critical, and it's important to avoid doomerisms at this juncture of time, a movie like The Long Walk reminds the audience that we are not alone. We aren't the only people who see how fucked this whole situation is, which is a relevant point considering how isolating authoritarianism is by design. That the government's onslaught against the notions of liberty and justice is in place on purpose to make us feel powerless, to force us to feel lonely, which is something that The Long Walk, both as a movie and as a competition with the film, clearly expresses as well. Because, combating authoritarianism is a grind. Because adjacent to fascism in the real world, The Long Walk as a competition tests your resolve. It saps your will, embezzles the freedoms and lives of others, and all we can do is survive against that grind. All we can do is keep walking long enough and hope we will see the light again.